On a crisp autumn afternoon in a small suburban neighborhood, where maple trees lined the streets and scattered their golden leaves across well-kept lawns, an elderly man named Mr. Chen made his daily walk to the local park. At 78 years old, he moved slowly but purposefully, using his wooden cane to steady himself as he navigated the uneven sidewalk. Mr. Chen had lived in the neighborhood for over 4 decades, watching it transform from a quiet residential area into a bustling community. Despite his age, he maintained a daily routine of walking to keep himself active and independent. His weathered face carried the wisdom of years, and his eyes still sparkled with kindness behind his wire-rimmed glasses. At the corner of Pine Street, where teenagers often gathered after school, a group of high school students had made it their unofficial hangout spot. They would spend hours there, scrolling through their phones and sharing videos, completely disconnected from the world around them. 3 of these teenagers, a tall boy wearing an oversized hoodie, his friend in a Letterman jacket, and a girl with bright blue hair, had noticed Mr. Chen's daily walks. That particular afternoon, as Mr. Chen approached their corner, the teens were feeling particularly mischievous. "Look, it's the turtle man again," the tall boy snickered, loud enough for his friends to hear. The girl with blue hair pulled out her phone, ready to record what they thought would be entertaining content for their social media. "Hey, Gramps," called out the boy in the Letterman jacket. "Need a rocket booster for that walking speed?" His friends burst into laughter, and the sound echoed off the nearby houses. Mr. Chen's steps faltered slightly, but he continued walking, his eyes fixed ahead. The teens, encouraged by their own amusement, decided to take their joke further. They began walking behind him, mimicking his slow pace and exaggerated movements. "This is going viral for sure," the blue-haired girl giggled, still recording with her phone. What the teens didn't know was that Mr. Chen had once been a respected high school teacher, known throughout the community for his unique approach to teaching life lessons. In his 40 years of teaching, he had encountered countless challenging students and had always found ways to transform their behavior without humiliation or anger. As the teenagers continued their mockery, a young woman named May, who worked at the local library, witnessed the scene from across the street. She had known Mr. Chen since she was a child. He had been her favorite teacher, the one who had encouraged her love of books and learning. Her first instinct was to rush over and confront the teens, but something in Mr. Chen's composed demeanor made her wait and watch. Mr. Chen continued his steady pace until he reached the park entrance. There, instead of following his usual path around the pond, he turned to face the teenagers. His movement was so unexpected that they stopped in their tracks, the phone still recording. "I see you find my walking entertaining," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Would you like to know why I walk this slowly?" The teens exchanged uncertain glances, caught off guard by his direct address. The blue-haired girl lowered her phone, her earlier confidence wavering. 20 years ago, Mr. Chen continued, "I was in a horrible car accident while rushing to get somewhere that, looking back, wasn't really that important. The doctors said I might never walk again." He gestured to his legs with his free hand. "Each step I take now is a victory, a reminder that sometimes life's greatest achievements come at a slow but steady pace." The teens stood in uncomfortable silence, the weight of their actions beginning to sink in. Mr. Chen reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 3 small, worn photographs. "Would you like to see something?" he asked, his voice gentle and inviting rather than accusatory. Curiosity overcame their embarrassment, and they stepped closer. The photos showed a younger Mr. Chen, standing proudly in a classroom surrounded by students. "These were taken over the years I spent teaching at River Valley High School. In fact," he smiled, pointing to one photo, "this student here became a doctor who helped me learn to walk again after my accident." The girl with blue hair quickly deleted the video she had been recording, her cheeks flushing red with shame. The boy in the Letterman jacket shifted his weight from one foot to another, unable to meet Mr. Chen's eyes. "You know," Mr. Chen continued, "every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. Some battles are visible, like my slow walking, but most are hidden beneath the surface. The true measure of a person isn't in how quickly they can walk, but in how they treat others who walk at a different pace." As he spoke, other passers-by had stopped to listen, including May, who had crossed the street and now stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. The teens noticed the growing audience, but Mr. Chen's words had captured their attention more than their embarrassment about the crowd. "I don't want an apology," Mr. Chen said, seeing the guilt on their faces. "Instead, I have a suggestion. If you're interested in creating content that goes viral, why not use your creativity to capture moments that lift people up rather than tear them down? You might be surprised at how much more satisfying that could be." The tall boy in the hoodie, who had been quiet for a while, finally spoke up. How did you become a teacher?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier mockery. Mr. Chen's eyes lit up at the question. "That's quite a story," he replied. "And if you're interested, I walk here every day at this time. Tomorrow, I could tell you about it, if you'd care to walk with me instead of behind me." The teens looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. The boy in the Letterman jacket stepped forward first. "We'll be here," he said quietly, and his friends nodded in agreement. As the crowd dispersed and the teens headed home, May approached Mr. Chen. "You never stop teaching, do you?" she asked with a smile. Mr. Chen watched the teenagers disappear around the corner. "Every moment is a chance to learn or to teach," he replied. "Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones we learn about ourselves." The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees, sending more leaves dancing across the sidewalk. Mr. Chen resumed his walk around the pond, his pace unchanged but his heart lighter, knowing that tomorrow might bring new students eager to learn a different kind of lesson, one that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The next day arrived with a gentle drizzle that painted the neighborhood in soft, muted colors. The three teenagers found themselves standing at their usual corner well before Mr. Chen's regular walking time. The tall boy in the hoodie, now wearing a rain jacket, paced nervously while his friends huddled under a shared umbrella. "Maybe he won't come today because of the rain," the blue-haired girl said, pushing her now damp hair away from her face. She had spent most of the previous night thinking about their actions, unable to shake the feeling of shame that had settled in her stomach. The boy in the Letterman jacket checked his phone for the 10th time. "We could just go home," he suggested half-heartedly, but none of them moved. Something about Mr. Chen's invitation had struck a chord with them, creating a curiosity that outweighed their embarrassment. Right on schedule, they spotted Mr. Chen approaching, holding an umbrella in one hand and his cane in the other. To their surprise, he was accompanied by May from the library, who carried a large canvas bag. As they drew closer, the teens could see Mr. Chen's warm smile. "I thought the rain might keep you away," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I'm glad to see I was wrong." He gestured to May. "This is Ms. May, a former student of mine who now runs our local library's youth programs. She asked to join us today, if you don't mind." The teens nodded awkwardly, introducing themselves properly for the first time. The tall boy was Raj, the blue-haired girl went by Sky, and the boy in the Letterman jacket was Danny. As they began walking together, matching their pace to Mr. Chen's, the initial tension began to ease. "Yesterday, Raj asked how I became a teacher," Mr. Chen began, his voice carrying clearly despite the soft patter of rain. "It's a story that begins with another group of teenagers who thought they knew everything about the world." May smiled, knowing what was coming. She had heard this story before, but it never failed to captivate her. "You see, 45 years ago, I was working as a janitor at River Valley High School," Mr. Chen continued. "I had recently immigrated to this country, and it was the only job I could find, despite having been a respected mathematics professor back home." The teens exchanged surprised glances. They had assumed he had always been a teacher. "Every day, I would clean the classrooms after school hours. One evening, I noticed a student struggling with her math homework in the library. She was crying, frustrated because she couldn't understand the concepts, and her test was the next day. Mr. Chen paused as they reached the park entrance. Instead of going in, he gestured to a covered picnic area nearby. Once they were all seated, May opened her canvas bag and pulled out thermos of hot chocolate and paper cups, passing them around. That student, Mr. Chen continued, warming his hands around his cup, reminded me of why I had loved teaching. I offered to help her, explaining the concepts in a way that finally made sense to her. What I didn't know was that the principal was working late that night and had witnessed everything. Sky leaned forward, completely absorbed in the story. What happened next? The student got an A on her test, and suddenly, I had a group of students staying after school, asking the janitor for help with their math homework. Mr. Chen chuckled at the memory. The principal called me into his office a week later. I thought I was in trouble, but instead, he offered me a chance to earn my teaching credentials while working as a teaching assistant. But wasn't it hard? Raj asked. Learning a new system, dealing with all the requirements? Incredibly hard, Mr. Chen nodded. There were many times I wanted to give up, go back to just being a janitor. But every time I saw a student's face light up with understanding, it gave me the strength to continue. Danny, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Is that why you're not angry at us? Because you've dealt with difficult students before? Mr. Chen took a thoughtful sip of his hot chocolate. I'm not angry because I understand that mockery often comes from a place of misunderstanding. When we don't know someone's story, it's easy to judge them based on what we see on the surface. May pulled something else from her bag, a yearbook from decades ago. Mr. Chen asked me to bring this, she said, opening it to a marked page. The teens gathered around to see a much younger Mr. Chen standing in front of a classroom, surrounded by students who were clearly adoring him. That was my first year as a full-time teacher, Mr. Chen explained. Every student in that photo had a story, just like each of you has a story. Some were dealing with difficult home lives, others with learning disabilities, and some with the pressure to be perfect. My job wasn't just to teach them mathematics, it was to help them see the value in themselves and others. The rain had started to ease, and a few rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. Sky pulled out her phone, but this time, instead of recording for mockery, she asked, Mr. Chen, could we take a picture with you? Like the one in the yearbook? Mr. Chen's face lit up. Of course. But first, I have something for each of you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 small, worn books. These are journals. When I was learning to be a teacher, writing helped me understand my journey. Perhaps they can help you understand yours. As May took their group photo, the teens held their journals close. The image captured something none of them had expected, genuine smiles, not the forced kind they usually put on for social media, but real expressions of connection and understanding. Tomorrow, Mr. Chen said as they prepared to leave, I'll tell you about the student who became a doctor. But here's a small homework assignment. Write 1 page in your journals about a time when someone surprised you by being more than what they appeared to be. As they walked home, the 3 friends were quieter than usual, each lost in their own thoughts. The journals in their hands felt like more than just blank pages, they felt like the beginning of something important, something real. Back at the picnic table, May helped Mr. Chen gather the empty cups. You know, she said, you could have told them about your accident right away, made them feel guilty. Mr. Chen shook his head, watching the retreating figures of the teenagers. Guilt teaches nothing lasting. But understanding, that can change everything. That evening, the 3 friends sat in Sky's bedroom, their new journals spread out before them. The blank pages seemed to stare back at them, waiting for words that felt difficult to find. Sky twirled a pen between her fingers, while Raj lay on the carpet, staring at the ceiling. Danny sat cross-legged on the floor, his journal already showing signs of erased attempts. I wrote about my grandmother, Sky finally said, breaking the silence. How I used to think she was just this old lady who couldn't understand anything about modern life. Then last year, I found her old photo albums. She paused, looking at her friends. Did you know she used to be a professional photographer? She traveled all over Asia capturing stories through her lens. Now she can barely hold a camera steady because of arthritis, but when she talks about her adventures, it's like she becomes young again. Raj sat up, his expression thoughtful. I wrote about the lunch lady at school, he admitted. Remember how we used to make fun of her accent? Last week, I stayed late after basketball practice, and I saw her teaching English to other immigrants in the cafeteria. She volunteers her time every evening, helping people like her build better lives here. Danny remained quiet, his pen hovering over his still empty page. His friends waited patiently, knowing that of the three of them, he usually had the hardest time expressing his feelings. I can't stop thinking about what Mr. Chen said, he finally spoke. About his accident, and how every step is a victory. It reminds me of my little brother. His voice cracked slightly. After his surgery last year, watching him learn to walk again. I never told anyone at school about it. It was easier to act like everything was normal. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence full of understanding. Their phones lay forgotten on Sky's desk, social media notifications piling up unnoticed. The next afternoon, they arrived at the corner early again. This time, they brought their journals and extra chairs borrowed from Sky's porch, setting up a small circle under the maple trees. When Mr. Chen arrived, his face brightened at the sight. I see you came prepared, he said, settling into one of the chairs. Today, he carried a small photo album along with his cane. Before I tell you about my former student who became a doctor, would any of you like to share what you wrote? One by one, they shared their stories. Mr. Chen listened intently, his eyes warm with appreciation. When they finished, he opened his photo album to a specific page. This is Dr. Lin, he said, showing them a photograph of a young man in graduation robes, standing proudly next to a younger Mr. Chen. But before he was Dr. Lin, he was just Tommy, a student who everyone had given up on. The teens leaned in closer to see the photo better. The young man was beaming at the camera, his arm around Mr. Chen's shoulders. Tommy had severe dyslexia, but back then, many teachers just thought he was lazy or stupid, Mr. Chen continued. He sat in the back of my classroom, drawing detailed pictures instead of taking notes. One day, I noticed that his drawings were actually diagrams of the human body. Mr. Chen turned the page, revealing more photos of Tommy through his high school years. Instead of forcing him to learn like everyone else, we worked together to find different ways for him to understand the material. He used his artistic skills to create visual representations of mathematical concepts. Soon, other students were asking to use his drawings to study. Is that how he became a doctor? Sky asked, genuinely curious. Mr. Chen smiled. His path wasn't that direct. After high school, he worked as a medical illustrator while taking night classes. It took him 8 years to complete his pre-med requirements, but he never gave up. His understanding of visual learning helped him develop new teaching methods for medical students who struggled like he did. And he was the one who helped you after your accident? Raj remembered. Yes, Mr. Chen nodded. Life has a way of bringing things full circle. When I was learning to walk again, Tommy, now Dr. Lin, used his drawings to help me understand my recovery process. He showed me exactly how each muscle needed to work, just like I had once helped him understand mathematics through his drawings. Danny had been quiet, studying the photos carefully. Mr. Chen, he said hesitantly, would it be okay if I brought my little brother to meet you sometime? He's still struggling with his physical therapy, and maybe. Of course, Mr. Chen answered warmly. In fact, I have something to show you all. He pulled out his phone, an action that surprised the teens, and opened a video. It showed a group of elderly people in a community center, some in wheelchairs, others using walkers, all moving slowly but purposefully through what appeared to be a gentle exercise routine. "Every Saturday morning, I lead a movement class at the senior center," he explained. "Dr. Lin helped me design exercises that are safe and helpful for people with various physical challenges. Your brother would be welcome to join us, Danny. Sometimes, healing happens better in a community." Sky's eyes lit up. "Could we help?" she asked eagerly. "I mean, if you need volunteers or anything." "Yeah," Raj added. "Maybe we could create some social media content about it. Like, actually meaningful content this time." Mr. Chen looked at each of them in turn, seeing the genuine desire to help in their eyes. "That would be wonderful," he said. "But first, I want you to spend this week observing. Come to Saturday's class, watch how people interact, learn their stories. Real understanding comes before real helping." As they packed up their chairs later that afternoon, each teen felt a sense of purpose they hadn't experienced before. Their corner, once just a place to kill time and make fun of passers-by, had transformed into something else, a place of learning, of sharing, of growing. "Tomorrow," Mr. Chen called as they parted ways, "bring your phones. But not for recording. I want to show you something about how we can use technology to bridge generations instead of dividing them." That evening, Danny sat with his little brother, Tommy, showing him the video Mr. Chen had shared. "Would you like to try it?" he asked softly. "The exercises look different from your usual therapy, but maybe." Tommy's face lit up, not just at the suggestion, but at seeing his big brother finally opening up about his struggles. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." Meanwhile, Sky sat with her grandmother, really listening to her stories about photography for the first time, while Raj helped his mother prepare dinner, asking her about her own journey as an immigrant, questions he'd never thought to ask before. In their journals that night, each of them wrote about transformation, not just the changes they were beginning to see in themselves, but the way their view of the world was slowly shifting, one story at a time. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunshine and a crisp breeze. Sky, Raj, and Danny stood outside the community center, watching as elderly residents arrived one by one. Some came in cars driven by family members, others walked slowly with their aides, and a few arrived in the community shuttle van. "I'm nervous," Sky whispered, clutching her phone. Mr. Chen had asked them to document the class, but with a different purpose than their usual social media posts. "What if we do something wrong?" Before anyone could respond, they heard a familiar voice. "Ah, my young friends." Mr. Chen called out, walking towards them with a bright smile. He was wearing comfortable exercise clothes instead of his usual attire, and he carried a small Bluetooth speaker along with his cane. As they entered the community center's multipurpose room, the teens were surprised to see how many people had gathered. There were about 20 seniors, all chatting and laughing as they settled into chairs arranged in a circle. Danny's brother Tommy was there too, sitting somewhat shyly in his wheelchair near the door. "Everyone," Mr. Chen announced to the group, "these young people are here to learn from us today." His emphasis on "learn from us" made several of the seniors smile. "They're going to help document our stories and our movements, so future generations can benefit from our wisdom." A woman in her 70s, wearing a bright floral shirt and using a walker, approached the teens. "I'm Mrs. Wong," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "I heard about what happened with Mr. Chen earlier this week. It takes courage to come back and try to make things right." The teens looked at their feet, embarrassed, but Mrs. Wong wasn't finished. "When I was your age, I made plenty of mistakes too. The question isn't whether we make mistakes, it's what we learn from them." As the class began, the teens witnessed something remarkable. Mr. Chen started with gentle music, guiding everyone through slow, purposeful movements. What amazed them wasn't just the exercises, it was the joy and determination on every face, the way people supported and encouraged each other. Sky found herself helping Mrs. Wong maintain her balance during a standing exercise. As they worked together, Mrs. Wong shared stories about her life as a dance teacher before arthritis changed her mobility. "But you know what?" she said, executing a graceful arm movement. "I may not be able to dance like I used to, but I can still find ways to move beautifully." Raj was stationed near an elderly man named Mr. Patel, who used a wheelchair. Despite his limited mobility, Mr. Patel's enthusiasm was contagious as he led the seated exercises with precise arm movements. "In my village in India," he told Raj during a break, "I was a yoga instructor for 50 years. Now I teach these modified movements to others who can't do traditional yoga. Every adaptation is a gift." Danny spent most of the class near his brother Tommy, watching as the boy gradually became more comfortable with the group. An elderly veteran named Mr. Rodriguez, who also used a wheelchair, showed Tommy some upper body strengthening exercises he had learned during his own rehabilitation years ago. As the teens recorded short clips and took photos, with everyone's permission, they began to see something they had missed before. These weren't just old people struggling with movement, they were teachers, artists, athletes, and professionals sharing their lifetime of wisdom through every careful gesture. During a water break, Mr. Chen gathered everyone in a circle. "Movement is just one part of what we do here," he explained. "The real magic happens in the stories we share." He nodded to Mrs. Wong, who pulled out an old photograph from her bag. "This was me in 1965, she said, showing a black-and-white image of herself as a young ballet dancer. "I performed with dance companies across Asia and Europe. Now, I may need a walker, but inside, I'm still dancing." One by one, others shared their photos and stories. Mr. Patel showed pictures of his yoga classes in India, where he had taught hundreds of students over the years. Mr. Rodriguez shared photos from his time as a physical therapist after leaving the military, helping other veterans recover from injuries. Sky looked at her phone, then at the seniors around her. "These stories are amazing," she said. "This is what should be going viral, not videos making fun of people." "That's right," Mr. Chen agreed. "But it's not just about sharing their past, it's about showing how they continue to impact lives today." He gestured around the room. "Every person here is still teaching, still contributing, still growing." As the class wound down, Tommy wheeled over to where the teens were reviewing their footage. "Can I help edit the video?" he asked hopefully. "I've been learning about video editing during my recovery." Danny looked at his brother with newfound respect. "Yeah, that would be awesome. Maybe we could work on it together." After the class, as people were gathering their belongings, Mrs. Wong approached Sky again. "You know," she said, "we're having a special event next weekend. Some of us are going to demonstrate how we've adapted our former passions to our current abilities. I'm going to show some modified dance movements, and Mr. Patel is leading a seated yoga session. Would you young people like to help us document it?" The teens exchanged excited glances. "We'd love to," Raj answered for all of them. "But, could we do more than just document? Could we maybe help organize it? Make it bigger?" Mr. Chen, who had been listening nearby, smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "Well," Sky said, warming to the idea, "what if we created a real event? We could invite families, show people that age and physical limitations don't define what someone can contribute to the community. And we could set up different stations," Danny added, "where people can learn modified versions of activities. Tommy's physical therapist might even be willing to come and share some tips." The energy in the room was palpable as ideas began flowing. Mr. Rodriguez suggested incorporating music from different decades, while Mr. Patel offered to teach simple breathing exercises that could help anyone, regardless of mobility level. As they left the community center that afternoon, the teens felt a sense of purpose they'd never experienced before. They had come expecting to fulfill a simple request to document a class, but they had found something much more valuable, a community of people who had so much to teach about resilience, adaptation, and the power of maintaining passion despite life's challenges. "You know what's weird?" Raj said as they walked home. "A week ago, we were making fun of Mr. Chen for walking slowly. Now I can't believe how much we've learned just by slowing down ourselves." Sky nodded, looking through the photos on her phone. These stories, these people, they're not just surviving, they're thriving in their own way. That's what people need to see. Danny, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "I think I understand now what Mr. Chen meant about every step being a victory. It's not just about physical movement, it's about moving forward in life, no matter what challenges you face." The following week buzzed with activity as preparations for the community event took shape. The teens had transformed Sky's garage into their unofficial headquarters, with poster boards, schedules, and lists covering every available surface. Tommy sat at a folding table, expertly editing their footage from the movement class into a touching promotional video. "Look at this part," Tommy said, gesturing to his laptop screen where Mrs. Wong was demonstrating a modified pirouette using her walker. "If we add the footage of her old performance photo here, it shows how she's adapted but kept her grace." His eyes shone with creative enthusiasm, and Danny couldn't help but notice how his brother seemed more confident each day. Sky hung up her phone, adding another note to their growing list. "The local physical therapy center wants to set up a booth," she announced. "They're bringing information about adaptive exercises and offering free consultations." Raj looked up from where he was designing flyers on his tablet. "My mom talked to the Indian Community Center. They want to help Mr. Patel organize the yoga session. They're bringing mats and props for everyone." The garage door opened, and Mr. Chen walked in with May from the library, both carrying boxes of supplies. "I see the command center is fully operational," he said with a smile, setting down his box. "Mr. Chen." Sky jumped up to help him. "We've got confirmation from almost all the seniors from your class. Mrs. Wong is bringing her old dance company photos to display, and Mr. Rodriguez has a surprise planned, but he won't tell us what it is." May began unpacking her box, revealing art supplies. "The library board approved our request to set up a storytelling corner at the event," she explained. "We'll have equipment to record people sharing their life stories, and art materials for children to illustrate them." As they sorted through the supplies, a car pulled up outside. It was Mrs. Wong, driven by her granddaughter Lisa, who was about the teen's age. They were carrying what looked like old photo albums and scrapbooks. "I hope we're not interrupting," Mrs. Wong said as they entered the garage. "But I thought you might want to see these for the display." She opened one of the albums, revealing yellowed newspaper clippings and programs from her dancing days. Lisa watched quietly as the teens gathered around her grandmother. "I didn't know about most of these stories until last week," she admitted. "Grandma never talked much about her dancing career before. But after she met you all at the movement class, she started sharing everything." Mrs. Wong touched a faded photograph tenderly. "Sometimes we keep our stories locked away because we think nobody wants to hear them," she said. "Or because it hurts to remember what we can no longer do. But you young people, you've helped us see that our stories still have value." Tommy wheeled closer to look at the photos. "Mrs. Wong," he said thoughtfully, "what if we created a then and now display? We could show photos of everyone from their younger days next to pictures of them doing their modified activities now. It could show people that adapting doesn't mean giving up." The idea sparked excitement in the room. Soon, everyone was contributing suggestions. Lisa offered to help design the photo displays, bringing her experience from the school yearbook committee. May proposed creating short biographies to accompany each photo set. As they worked, Mr. Chen sat in a corner, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. Sky noticed him taking notes in his own journal and went to sit beside him. "What are you writing about?" she asked. "I'm documenting this journey," he replied, showing her his neat handwriting. "From that first day on the street corner to now. Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected places." Sky thought about the video she had almost posted just a week ago, mocking this wise man's walk. "I still feel ashamed about what we did," she admitted. Mr. Chen closed his journal. "Shame is like a heavy stone," he said. "It can either weigh you down, or you can use it as a stepping stone to something better. Look around this room. Look at what you've helped create." The garage had become a hub of intergenerational activity. Danny was helping Tommy and Lisa sort through photos while sharing stories. Raj was showing Mr. Patel how to use a tablet to record his yoga instructions. Mrs. Wong was teaching her simplified dance movements to May, both of them laughing as they practiced with imaginary walkers. "This weekend's event is just the beginning," Mr. Chen continued. "You've helped bridge a gap that many people don't even realize exists. You've shown that every age has something to teach and something to learn." Just then, Mr. Rodriguez arrived, finally ready to reveal his surprise. He wheeled and carrying what looked like old military gear. "These are my old physical therapy tools from when I worked with veterans," he explained. "But look what I've done with them." He demonstrated how he had modified standard military training equipment to be accessible for people with different mobility levels. "It's not about doing things the way we used to," he said. "It's about finding new ways to stay strong and independent." The teens were fascinated by his innovations. Danny immediately saw how some of the modifications could help Tommy with his exercises. Sky started photographing the equipment for their display, while Raj took notes on the adaptations. As the afternoon wore on, more community members dropped by to contribute ideas and offers of help. The owner of the local coffee shop wanted to provide refreshments. A retired music teacher offered to create a playlist spanning 7 decades. A group of high school drama students volunteered to help with setup and coordination. What had started as a simple idea was blossoming into something bigger than any of them had imagined. The teens' social media accounts, once filled with mockery and shallow entertainment, now showcased stories of resilience, adaptation, and intergenerational connection. That evening, after everyone had gone home, the 3 friends sat in their usual spot at the corner where it had all begun. But instead of scrolling mindlessly through their phones, they were reviewing their event plans. "You know what's amazing?" Raj said, looking up at the darkening sky. "A week ago, we thought we knew everything. We thought we were so cool, making fun of people who were different from us. And now we're learning something new every day," Sky added. "Not just about organizing events or editing videos, but about life." Danny nodded, thinking about how his relationship with Tommy had transformed. Mr. Chen was right about understanding being more powerful than guilt. We could have just felt bad about what we did and avoided him forever. Instead, we're part of something meaningful," Sky finished. She looked at her phone, where their event poster was displayed. The title read, "Moving Forward Together, a Celebration of Adaptation and Resilience." As they parted ways for the night, each felt the weight of anticipation for the upcoming event. But it wasn't nervous energy anymore, it was the excitement of knowing they were about to help create something truly special. The morning of the event arrived with perfect weather, sunny but cool, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Sky, Raj, and Danny had arrived at the community center before dawn, their hearts racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness as they began setting up. The large multipurpose room had been transformed. Photo displays lined the walls, showing the remarkable, then and now, stories of their senior friends. A dedicated space for adaptive yoga was set up with specially modified equipment. The storytelling corner featured comfortable chairs and recording equipment, while the physical therapy station was arranged with Mr. Rodriguez's innovative adaptive tools. "I can't believe how many people have already arrived to help," Sky said, watching as volunteers streamed in. The local coffee shop owner was setting up a refreshment station, and high school drama students were arranging chairs and helping with decorations. Tommy wheeled around the room, directing people to various stations with newfound confidence. He had taken charge of the technical aspects, ensuring the audio-visual equipment worked perfectly for their presentation. The promotional video he had edited was ready to play on a large screen, telling the story of how this event came to be. Mr. Chen arrived early, looking dapper in a blue blazer. His eyes moistened as he took in the scene. "When I first suggested you come to our movement class," he said to the teens, "I never imagined it would lead to this." Before they could respond, Mrs. Wong's voice called out from the entrance. "Oh my goodness!" She stood there in an elegant outfit, her walker decorated with ribbons that matched her clothes. Behind her, a stream of people from her old dance company began flowing in, carrying more photos and memorabilia. "The local newspaper is here," May announced, hurrying over with a reporter and photographer in tow. "They want to do a story about intergenerational community building." The teens exchanged glances, remembering how differently they had planned to use media attention just a week ago. Now, instead of seeking viral fame through mockery, they were helping share stories that actually mattered. As the start time approached, people began pouring in. Families with children, teenagers, adults, and seniors, the community center was filling up with people from all walks of life. Mr. Patel's yoga session had attracted participants ranging from young children to great-grandparents, all learning modified poses together. In the storytelling corner, Mrs. Wong sat regally in a decorated chair, sharing tales from her dancing days with an enthralled audience. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing pictures as she described performing on stages across the world. When she demonstrated a modified dance move with her walker, the children immediately wanted to try it too. Mr. Rodriguez's station had become unexpectedly popular. Veterans who had heard about the event through the local VFW had come to see his adaptive equipment. Soon, he was surrounded by people sharing their own stories of recovery and adaptation, with younger visitors eagerly learning about resilience from their experiences. Danny stood with Tommy near the screen where their video was playing. They watched as people stopped to view it, many wiping away tears at the powerful transformation it showed. "You did an amazing job with the editing," Danny told his brother, realizing he'd never really acknowledged Tommy's talents before. "Thanks," Tommy replied, beaming. "You know, I used to think my accident had ruined everything. But looking at all these people today, I'm starting to see things differently." Raj was helping Mr. Patel demonstrate a seated breathing exercise when his mother arrived with a group from their temple. She stopped, watching her son with pride as he patiently helped an elderly woman modify a movement to accommodate her arthritis. Sky found herself moving between groups, taking photos and videos that were completely different from what usually filled her social media. These weren't staged or filtered for likes, they were genuine moments of connection and learning. The highlight of the morning came when Mr. Chen gathered everyone for a special presentation. The teens hadn't known about this part of the program, and they sat nervously as he took the microphone. "A week ago," he began, "three young people made a choice that could have gone very differently." He gestured to Sky, Raj, and Danny. They could have remained focused on creating content that mocked others. Instead, they chose to learn, to understand, and to create something meaningful. He went on to share how their initial encounter had led to this moment, causing the teens to blush as people applauded. But Mr. Chen wasn't finished. "Today, we're not just celebrating physical movement or adaptation," he continued. "We're celebrating the movement of hearts and minds. We're celebrating the truth that every person, regardless of age or ability, has value and wisdom to share." As if to prove his point, a commotion arose from the yoga area. A young girl with cerebral palsy, who had arrived with her parents, was excitedly showing Mr. Patel how she had adapted one of his poses to work with her mobility aids. Mr. Patel was watching intently, taking notes and asking her to demonstrate again. "You see? Mr. Chen said, smiling at the scene. Teaching and learning flow both ways when we open our hearts to understand each other. The event continued into the afternoon, with unexpected moments of connection happening everywhere. A group of teenagers who had come to support their friends ended up sitting with Mrs. Wong, fascinated by her stories. Several physical therapy students were deep in conversation with Mr. Rodriguez about his innovations. In the storytelling corner, May had begun recording what she called wisdom interviews, where younger participants asked questions of their elders. The responses were being transcribed and illustrated, creating a growing collection of intergenerational wisdom. "We should make this a regular thing," Sky said to her friends as they watched the activities unfold. "Not just a one-time event, but an ongoing program." Raj nodded enthusiastically. "Maybe we could help other communities set up similar programs. Share what we've learned about bringing people together. And we could create a proper documentary," Tommy added from his wheelchair. "Not just about the event, but about the whole journey. Show people how small changes in perspective can lead to big changes in community." Danny looked at his brother with newfound respect. "You know what? That's a brilliant idea. We could start with Mr. Chen's story, then branch out to show how one person's influence can create a ripple effect." As the afternoon wound down, people were reluctant to leave. Contact information was being exchanged, future meetings planned, and new friendships formed. The teens' phones were full of messages from people wanting to get involved in future events. Mr. Chen found them sitting together near the photo display, looking tired but happy. "So," he said, lowering himself into a chair beside them, "what have you learned from all this?" Sky thought for a moment before answering. "We learned that everyone has a story worth hearing, if we just take the time to listen. And that being different isn't a weakness," Raj added. "It's an opportunity to find new ways of doing things. We learned that real connections are more valuable than viral videos," Danny said, glancing at Tommy. "And that sometimes the best teachers are the ones we least expect." Mr. Chen smiled, pulling out his journal. "Then perhaps it's time for your next assignment," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Would you like to know what it is?" A month had passed since the community event, but its impact continued to ripple through the neighborhood in unexpected ways. The teens sat in their usual spot at the corner, but instead of phones in their hands, they had their journals and laptops, working on Mr. Chen's next assignment, documenting the changes they'd witnessed in themselves and their community. "Listen to this," Sky said, reading from an email. 3 other community centers want to start similar programs. They saw the documentary Tommy made and want our help setting up intergenerational activities. Tommy, who now regularly joined their corner meetings, was editing new footage on his laptop. His physical therapy sessions had become easier since he started incorporating some of Mr. Rodriguez's adaptive techniques, and his confidence had grown tremendously. "The best part," he said, looking up from his screen, "is how many young people have reached out. Remember that group of kids from the next town over? The ones who were making fun of their local seniors? They came to our workshop last week and now they're starting their own program." Raj nodded, scrolling through the community newsletter he was helping to create. "It's like Mr. Chen said, understanding really does change everything. Look at how many new programs have started since the event." The newsletter showed an impressive list. Weekly adaptive yoga classes led by Mr. Patel had expanded to 3 sessions to accommodate growing interest. Mrs. Wong had started a Dance Through Time program, teaching modified dance movements to people of all ages and abilities. Mr. Rodriguez's innovative adaptive equipment designs were being studied by a local physical therapy practice. Speaking of Mr. Chen, Danny said, checking his watch, "We should head to the community center. Today's the first meeting of the Legacy Project." The Legacy Project had been Mr. Chen's next assignment, an initiative to collect and preserve the stories and wisdom of community elders while creating meaningful connections between generations. What had started as a simple event had evolved into a movement. As they packed up their things, they noticed how different their corner felt now. What had once been just a place to kill time and mock passers-by had become a hub of creative planning and community building. Even the physical space had changed. They'd worked with the city to install a comfortable bench and plant flowers, making it a welcoming spot for people to rest during their walks. At the community center, the main room was already filling up with familiar faces and new ones. May had helped set up recording stations where young people could interview seniors about their life experiences. Local artists had volunteered to create portraits and illustrations to accompany the stories. "There you are," Mrs. Wong called out, waving them over. She was sitting with a group of high school students, showing them photographs from her dancing days. "I was just telling them about how this all started. Would you like to share your perspective?" The teens exchanged glances, still feeling a touch of shame about their initial behavior. But they had learned that sharing their story of transformation often helped others recognize their own potential for change. "Actually," Sky said, pulling out her phone, "we have something to show you." She pulled up their old social media accounts, now transformed into platforms for sharing intergenerational stories and promoting community connections. Their latest post was going viral, not for mockery or pranks, but for a touching series about local seniors teaching their life skills to younger generations. The video showed Mr. Patel guiding a young athlete through breathing techniques, Mrs. Wong helping a group of dancers modify their movements for injured colleagues, and Mr. Rodriguez working with veterans to adapt his equipment for different needs. "You know what's remarkable?" Mr. Chen said, approaching the group. "Not just the changes in how you use social media, but how you've inspired others to do the same." He showed them his own phone, where dozens of similar initiatives had sprung up in other communities, all crediting their event as inspiration. Young people were reaching out to their elderly neighbors, learning their stories, and finding ways to bridge generational gaps. But the most significant change, Mr. Chen continued, isn't visible in these posts or programs. It's in here. He touched his heart. It's in how we see each other, how we value each other's experiences and challenges. Tommy wheeled over to join them, excited to share his latest project. He had been working with a group of young tech enthusiasts to develop an app that would help connect seniors with young people interested in learning from their experiences. "We're calling it Wisdom Bridge," he explained, showing them the prototype. "It's like a social network, but focused on meaningful connections and skill sharing between generations." As the Legacy Project meeting began, the room buzzed with energy. Seniors shared stories while young people listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and recording responses. Artists sketched portraits and scenes, while writers helped capture the narratives in compelling ways. Mr. Rodriguez had brought more of his adaptive equipment, now refined based on feedback from the community. He was working with a group of engineering students who wanted to help develop and distribute his designs to rehabilitation centers. "Remember when we thought seniors were just slow and boring?" Raj whispered to his friends as they watched the interactions around them. "Now look at us, we can barely keep up with their energy and ideas." Danny smiled, watching Tommy demonstrate his app to an enthusiastic group of seniors. "It's not just about what we can teach each other," he said. "It's about how we can grow together." Sky was helping Mrs. Wong set up for her afternoon movement class when a group of young teens walked in, looking nervous and uncomfortable, much like they had felt that first day with Mr. Chen. "Welcome," Mrs. Wong called out warmly. "You're just in time. We're about to learn how to adapt ballet movements for different mobility levels. Would you like to join us?" The teens hesitated, but something in Mrs. Wong's welcoming smile drew them in. Soon they were laughing and trying modified dance steps, their initial discomfort forgotten in the joy of movement and connection. Later that afternoon, as the Legacy Project session wound down, Mr. Chen gathered everyone in a circle. The room was filled with the evidence of their work, recorded stories, artwork, plans for future projects, and most importantly, new friendships bridging generations. "A month ago," he said, we held an event that we thought would be a one-time thing. But look what it has grown into." He gestured around the room. "Every person here has a story worth telling, experience worth sharing, and wisdom worth preserving. And every person here has something to learn, something to gain from connecting with others." As the teens listened to Mr. Chen speak, they thought about their own transformation. From thoughtless mockery to genuine understanding, from seeking viral fame to creating meaningful content, from avoiding differences to embracing them, their journey had changed not just them, but their entire community. And it had all started with a slow walk down a sidewalk, a moment of cruelty met with wisdom, and the choice to learn rather than turn away. As they looked around at the vibrant, intergenerational community they had helped create, they realized that sometimes the best lessons come from the very people we once failed to understand. 1 year had passed since that fateful day when 3 teens had mocked an elderly man's slow walk. The corner where it all began had transformed into a beautiful community gathering spot, complete with benches, flowers, and a small plaque that read, "Every journey begins with a single step." It was a warm spring afternoon, and the community center was filled with excitement. The Legacy Project had grown beyond anyone's expectations, and today they were celebrating its first anniversary. The walls were lined with photographs, stories, and artwork documenting the incredible journey of the past year. Sky, Raj, and Danny stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. Tommy wheeled around, coordinating the technical aspects of the celebration with practiced ease. His Wisdom Bridge app had launched successfully, connecting thousands of seniors and young people across multiple communities. "Can you believe how much has changed in just 1 year?" Sky asked, watching as Mrs. Wong arrived, leading a group of dance students of all ages and abilities. Her Dance Through Time program had become so popular that she now taught at 3 different community centers. "Remember this?" Raj said, pointing to a framed photo on the wall. It showed their first Saturday morning at the movement class, their faces nervous and uncertain. Next to it hung a recent picture of them leading a workshop for other communities wanting to start their own intergenerational programs. Mr. Patel's yoga sessions had evolved into a comprehensive wellness program that combined traditional practices with modern adaptive techniques. He worked closely with physical therapists and rehabilitation specialists, helping people find ways to maintain their practice despite physical limitations. Mr. Rodriguez's adaptive equipment designs had caught the attention of a medical supply company. With the help of the engineering students, he had refined and patented his innovations. The proceeds went to a foundation he created to provide adaptive equipment to those who couldn't afford it. As people filled the community center, the atmosphere was electric with shared purpose and joy. Young children sat with seniors, learning to knit or paint. Teenagers helped older adults navigate technology while receiving wisdom about life's challenges. The boundaries of age and ability had blurred into a tapestry of mutual respect and understanding. Mr. Chen arrived last, walking steadily with his cane. Despite another year's passing, his steps were purposeful, his eyes bright with the same wisdom that had transformed 3 misguided teens into community leaders. "Before we begin today's celebration," he announced, taking center stage, "I want to share something with you." He pulled out his journal, worn and filled with a year's worth of observations. This journey began with mockery, but it transformed into something beautiful. Let me tell you how. The room fell silent as Mr. Chen began to read. He described the initial encounter, the teen's transformation, and the ripple effects that had touched countless lives. His words painted a picture of community, resilience, and the power of understanding. "But perhaps," he said, closing his journal, "it's better to hear from those who lived this story." He gestured to Sky, Raj, and Danny. The 3 friends made their way to the front, no longer the same teenagers who had once sought entertainment in cruelty. Sky spoke first, her voice clear and confident. "A year ago, we thought we knew everything," she began. "We judged people based on what we could see on the surface. We valued viral videos over real connections. But Mr. Chen showed us a different way. Raj continued, we learned that every person has a story worth hearing, wisdom worth sharing, and challenges worth understanding. We learned that true strength isn't about physical ability, it's about resilience, adaptation, and the courage to keep moving forward. Danny added, most importantly, we learned that community isn't built on perfection or power. It's built on understanding, acceptance, and the willingness to learn from each other. Tommy wheeled forward, joining them. And we learned that limitations are only barriers if we let them be. Every challenge is an opportunity to find new ways of doing things, new ways of connecting. As they spoke, images and videos played on the screen behind them, a year's worth of moments capturing the transformation of not just 4 teenagers, but an entire community. The recordings showed seniors teaching life skills to young people, teenagers helping older adults adapt to new challenges, and people of all ages finding ways to move, create, and connect. The celebration continued with demonstrations from various programs that had grown from their initiative. Mrs. Wong's dance students performed a piece that beautifully incorporated walkers and wheelchairs into the choreography. Mr. Patel led a group through adaptive yoga poses that everyone could participate in, regardless of mobility level. Mr. Rodriguez unveiled his latest adaptive equipment designs, developed with input from both medical professionals and the people who would use them. The engineering students who had helped him shared how the project had changed their approach to design, making them more mindful of diverse needs and abilities. Near the end of the celebration, May announced that the library had created a special collection of the Legacy Project stories, artwork, and recordings. These aren't just memories, she explained. They're a roadmap for other communities, showing how understanding and connection can transform lives. As the day drew to a close, people lingered, sharing stories and making plans for future projects. The teens found themselves back at their corner, sitting with Mr. Chen on the benches they had helped install. You know, Mr. Chen said, looking at the plaque, when I first walked this path a year ago, I never imagined where it would lead. But that's the beauty of life, every step, no matter how slow or difficult, has the potential to take us somewhere remarkable. Sky looked at her phone, where the Wisdom Bridge app showed dozens of new connections being made. We thought we were teaching others, she said, but we were the ones learning all along. Raj nodded, watching as sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. And we're still learning. Every story we hear, every person we meet, teaches us something new. Danny put his arm around Tommy's shoulders. Sometimes the best lessons come from our biggest mistakes, he said. If we hadn't mocked Mr. Chen that day. But you did, Mr. Chen interrupted gently. And look what grew from that moment of thoughtlessness, friendship, understanding, community. That's the power of choosing to learn from our mistakes instead of being defined by them. As darkness fell, the corner where their journey began glowed softly in the light of newly installed lanterns. The plaque caught the light, its message a reminder that every journey, every transformation, every community begins with a single step. The teens looked at each other, remembering who they had been a year ago and marveling at who they had become. They had learned that true influence comes not from viral videos or clever mockery, but from genuine connection and understanding. They had discovered that every person, regardless of age or ability, has value and wisdom to share. Most importantly, they had learned that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become something better than you were before. As they sat together in the growing darkness, they knew that their journey wasn't ending, it was just beginning. For every step forward, every new connection made, every barrier broken down, created possibilities for more understanding, more growth, more community. And it had all started with a slow walk down a sidewalk, a moment of cruelty met with wisdom, and the choice to learn rather than turn away.